Hey guys, and welcome to Graphic Designer Pro. In this video, we're going to show you how to design a reusable template for engaging LinkedIn carousels using Adobe Illustrator. This can really take the content you or your clients are putting out on LinkedIn to the next level. To make this even easier, we've created a template file that you can download for free from the description below that will save you a ton of time as well. Remember, if you enjoy this video, then hit the like button and subscribe for more weekly design content. Okay, let's head on to Illustrator now and get started. Okay, so here we are in the template file that you can download from the description below. This is all set up, ready to go for you, so you can start inputting your own content or the content of your clients. And it's so easy to use. So if I zoom out a little bit, you'll see we have a bunch of slides set up here. Now, the beauty of LinkedIn carousels, or LinkedIn documents as they're technically known, is that we can actually have loads of slides if we want to. Now, in most scenarios, you're not going to need that many. We've set this up with 8 slides by default, but you can always add to this or use fewer than 8 as well. It's really up to you and the content you're putting out. Now, you'll see we have lots of placeholder text, header and footer elements, guides, all sorts going on, and all of this is easy to manage with thanks to the layers panel. And if we navigate over to it now, you can see how this is set up. So we have our background elements all locked on its own layer. We have content images, content text, header and footer elements, and the guides are on their own layer as well. So if I toggle the visibility of them, you can see more clearly how each slide is going to look. This also makes it much easier to manage and edit this content without accidentally deleting or moving elements that you don't want to. So what we've aimed to do here is to create some clear branding throughout each slide, consistent text hierarchy, consistent spacing, and even thinking about elements that move from one slide to another to help with engagement, and just give your audience some visual cues to keep scrolling through the post. We've also created a few different layouts, and we've left placeholder areas for things like images as well. So generally speaking, the first slide you're always going to want to start with something eye-catching, something that's going to want to make your audience scroll through the rest of this post. So starting with a big headline, for example, or an image, or a combination of a headline and an image is always going to help. We've aimed to keep the text elements clear and legible, not trying to put too much in any one slide. This is really going to help with the flow of these carousels. It's always a good idea to end with some kind of call to action, whether it be just to like or comment, or potentially even asking your audience a question about other content they want to see, for example. This is a great thing to do at the end of any carousel post, as it's going to really help with engagement. So this is the template file. This is all ready to go for you. What we're going to do in this video though is create this from scratch so that you can see how we did this, and we're actually going to be doing this for a real world client. So this is for a client of ours called Nicholsmith Investments, and they have asked for a LinkedIn carousel for one of their recent property investment case studies. So we're not going to go into the ins and outs of their business, but this is a great example of how we set something like this up for a real client and how we can then use it going forward for future posts as well. So the first thing we want to do is create a new document. So I'm just going to go up to File, New, and the document size you choose is really up for debate. You can technically use a variety of sizes to great effect. You can opt for a square format like we would see on Instagram carousels, for example, but one of the features of the LinkedIn carousel is that we can view this full screen. So for that reason, I like to stick to 1920 by 1080 pixels. This is a good aspect ratio and size for most screens, so it's going to perform well on things like desktop computers and laptops, which is what a lot of people will use on a platform like LinkedIn. So I'm choosing the web 1920 by 1080 pixel preset here. I'm not changing anything else, and I'm going to go ahead and click create. So here we have our first artboard, and one thing to note in our template file is that each of these slides is set up on its own artboard. So this comes in very handy when it comes to exporting this, as we'll cover later on in this video. So we have one slide here, one 1920 by 1080 slide, and what I'm going to do to begin with is just move this right over to the left of our artboard, because I want to to have these flowing on from one another, it's always a good idea to start over on the left hand side so that we don't run out of space on the right. Now before I go any further, I'm just going to make sure I've saved this, and I will continue to save this throughout this process. So I'm just going up to File, Save As, and I will save this to a location of my choosing. So the next thing I want to do is create my layer structure. So to do this, I need to go over to my layers panel. If you don't already have this set up, you can always go to Window and then down to Layers from there. But over here, I'm going to start with my background layer. So I'm just going to rename layer 1. We don't actually have anything in there at the moment. So let's just rename this background. Go down to the plus icon at the bottom and add a new layer. And what I'm going to do is just add a few more so that we have 5 layers all together. So going up to layer 2, this is going to be our content images layer. So that's exactly what I'm going to call this. Going up to layer 3, this is going to be our content text layer. So I like to keep my text and images on separate layers, and this can just help when it comes to having slides where we have both text and images. It's slightly easier to manage them and organize them. Layer 4 is going to be our header and footer information. So I'm just going to say header/footer. And then finally, layer 5 is going to be our guides layer. So this is how I like to use guides. I actually like to put them all on a single layer and then lock that layer, and then it's easy just to toggle the visibility of that. We're not going to accidentally move any of the guides when we're editing the rest of our content. So speaking of guides, that's the first thing I'm going to be setting up. Now before I do that, let's create a few more artboards for some more slides. So I'm going to click on the artboard tool on the left hand side. That's going to select our current artboard, and all I'm going to do here is hold Option or Alt on a PC and click and drag. I'll hold Shift just to make sure that's locking onto the same horizontal plane here, and making sure your smart guides are on. I'm just making sure that the left edge of this artboard is snapping with the right edge of our original artboard. So this is just a useful way to design these carousels, especially if you have elements going from one slide to another. If they're all butted up against one another, we can do this without having to split objects and elements up and try to basically guess where they're going from one slide to another. So that's the beauty of this process. I'm going to keep doing this exact same process and create a few more slides. We're actually going to be creating 12 slides. So this carousel that we're going to be creating is slightly bigger than the template. Like I say, we can technically have quite a few slides if we want to. The idea with LinkedIn is that we can essentially upload presentations that you may have done for other businesses or what have you, and they can just be uploaded and it will automatically get repurposed into a carousel. So we have 8 artboards now. I'm just going to hold Shift and click on the previous 3, so we have 4 selected, and again holding Option or Alt on a PC, I'm just going to duplicate those last 4 and I'm just going to bring them back over to the left hand side. Doesn't really matter, but just for organization. As I say, you could create tons of these artboards. Where they break, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to have graphics and things flowing from one another, but in this case, it's not going to be an issue, but unfortunately there's not much we can do about that. So let's go back to our first artboard. I'll click on it and just zoom in, and we're going to set up our guides. So to do that, I'm going to make sure I'm on my guides layer for a start. And the way I like to do this is not particularly technical. I'm just going to grab my rectangle tool and I'm just going to click once within here. I want to just create a 100 pixel by 100 pixel square. So this is going to essentially be the size of my margins. I'm just going to remove the stroke and just add a bright fill color to this just to make it stand out more. And with it selected, I'm going to use my align options up in the control panel. You can equally access the align panel via the window menu, and I'm just going to left align this to the artboard and then align it to the top of the artboard as well, so it's sitting flush in that top left hand corner. Make sure that you have align to artboard checked. It should be by default, but just in case it isn't, you can change it from this little drop down menu. I'm going to hold Option or Alt again and click and drag out a duplicate, and I'm going to do the same thing but for the bottom right hand corner using the horizontal align right option and then the vertical align bottom option, so we now have that flush in the bottom right hand corner. From here we want to enable our rulers, so to do that it's Command R on a Mac or Control R on a PC, and you should see these rulers appearing across the top and left hand side of your workspace. So I'm going to start with the vertical guides. All we need to do is click from one of those rulers and drag, and that's going to create a guide. Now you might not see it until you let go. You can see we have a magenta guide here. Now one thing is with Illustrator, I've always experienced this, it's always tricky to actually align these with objects. In this case it is working. You can see my smart guides appearing there. If I let go, that is aligning to the right of this square, but sometimes it doesn't, and if it doesn't, the best technique I've found is to move this slightly to the left of the right edge of that square, click and drag over both of them, and again just use your align options to right align both of those elements. So it's just a quick tip, it works for me. Like I say, the guide alignment can be a little bit hit and miss when I've used it before in Illustrator. So I'm going to click and drag out another guide here, and I'm going to snap that to the left edge of our bottom right hand box. So here's an example, it's not snapping in this case, so I'll just bring it past that left edge of the box, click and drag over the guide and the box, and then I'll left align these two elements. So we have our vertical guides for this first slide. I'm now going to drag out some horizontal guides. Going to the top ruler, just clicking and dragging, and it's the exact same process here. I'm going to take this slightly above the bottom of this top box, select both, and we will align these to the bottom, and same again with the box in the bottom right. I'm going to take this below the top edge, select both, and align that to the top edge. So that's it. We have our guides in place. We have consistent margins set for our first slide here, and luckily this is really easy to copy over to all of our other slides. So what I'm going to do is just click and drag over the vertical guides that we have set up. You'll see they will highlight magenta to denote that they're selected. I'm going to press Command X, and that's going to cut them away, but what I'm going to do now is paste them in place, and it's going to apply to all artboards. So I can do that by going up to Edit and Paste on all artboards, or the keyboard shortcut is Option Shift Command V, or that will be Alt Shift Control V on a PC. So if I just click this though, you can see this is applying to every artboard. So very easy to do that. The only thing we now need to do is copy our horizontal guides to the artboards below. So this won't apply if you're only doing 8 or fewer slides, but in this case I'm going to click and drag over them, press Command X to cut them away, and again that keyboard shortcut Shift Option Command V, and that's going to apply to both rows of artboards. The reason I cut them away is because if you were to just copy them, you're essentially pasting guides over that first artboard again, so you'd have duplicates of guides. Doesn't really matter, but this is just something to consider, and we'll show you that again in a little bit as well. So from this point we have our guides set up. All I need to do now is just lock that layer, and really I don't need to worry about this layer again unless I want to add any more guides for any reason, but now I can't accidentally move any of these guides. They're locked in place, and all I really need to do is toggle the visibility of that layer. So that's super easy. Next we're going to move on to our background layer, and again this is totally dependent on your branding or your client's branding, but this is a good chance to bring some color into your designs. So I'm just going to grab my rectangle tool. Again, using my smart guides, I'm just going to click and drag out a rectangle the size of this first artboard here, and I'm just going to apply a default swatch here for now. What I will start doing is bringing in brand elements for this client to actually make this on brand for them. So this is nice and simple. You can change this throughout your designs. Another nice thing to try is to actually drag this rectangle out over a whole bunch of slides, and we could actually apply a gradient to this, and that way the colors are obviously changing throughout the slides, but you're not going to have any harsh color changes from one slide to the next. We could go with a turquoisey color into a blue, for example, and when we export this, each artboard is going to be its own slide, so you don't need to worry that this is going to export out as a single rectangle, for example. It will all be automatically cut up essentially. So that can be a nice technique. I'm just going to press undo a few times. We'll just go back to a single slide background. Again, this is another example where I could press Command X to cut this away, or Control X on a PC, and then Shift Option Command V, or Shift Alt Control V on a PC, and that's just going to apply the same color background to all slides. I could go into any one of these and change them if I wanted to as well, but just for speed right now, we're going to just apply the same background to all of these. We'll change this afterwards. So again, I can go ahead and lock that background layer. The next thing I like to do is sort my headers and footers. So what I'm really focusing on right now is all of the elements that are largely going to stay the same throughout all of my carousel designs. So if this is for a specific client, like we say, hopefully this is the kind of thing you set up once and you don't really have to alter that much for every post you do after that. So this is the beauty of these templates. So up on our header and footer layer, what I'm going to do is just grab my type tool, and we're just going to add some elements around each corner. It's really up to you what you want to place in here, but this is quite a nice way of just adding some consistent elements throughout each slide. So for example, we'll write 2021, and what can be a good idea is to format this first. So I'm going to select one of the brand fonts, which I know is Railway. We're going to up the text size here. We'll probably go with 36 point, for example, and we'll just leave this black for now. We'll adjust things like colors towards the end, and again, using my guides, I always keep the guides on in these initial stages to make sure everything is aligned properly. We'll place that up in the top right hand corner. Holding Option, let's click and drag out a duplicate. We'll drag that down to the bottom. One thing I actually like to do is if I select both of these, I'm going to make sure they're right aligned. So that means if I do make any changes and I have these aligned on that right hand margin, it's not going to go past that margin. So for example, let's grab my type tool and we'll change this to be the slide number. This is something I like to do. It helps people know how long the carousel is, and sometimes that can be a good thing. It can make them actually want to scroll through if they realize that it's not some massive presentation. If it's just a few slides, it's a little bit more manageable. So I'm just going to put 1/12 because we have 12 slides overall, and I'll just add another text element over on the bottom left hand side. This time I'm going to change the paragraph alignment to the left, and we'll put in the web address for this client. So this is a good way, again, just to link something like an email address or some way of getting in contact with the client as well. It's a good opportunity to do that. So just looking at this, I'm actually just going to reduce the text size of these elements a little bit. These are elements that I want to feature on every page, so I don't want them to be too distracting from the actual content on those pages. So I'm going to take this down to about 28 point, maybe a touch small. I can adjust this all afterwards, but this will do for the time being. Now I like to add a logo mark of some kind in the top left hand corner, again just to reinforce the branding of these designs. So in this case I will add the Nicholsmith Investments logo mark in the top left hand corner. Again, I'll do that afterwards. For now I'm just focusing on the core elements. What I'm going to do first is just select these three text elements that we've added around the edges of the slide, and the exact same thing as we've just been doing. I'm going to press Command X to cut this away, then Shift Option Command V to paste that on all other slides. So nice and consistent. The only thing I do need to make sure I do is go through and adjust the slide numbers. So with my type tool, I'm going to highlight that one and just go through each of these to make sure that they are going sequentially in order. And one thing to note is that this will export in the order of the artboards that were created. So if we're duplicating from the left and just creating these off to the right, it's obviously going to go in the order that they're created. So if I grab my artboard tool, the thing to note here is the number before the artboard name. So you can see on this artboard, for example, it says 03 and then artboard 1 copy 2 because this was the second copy of the first artboard, but that 03 is the number we want to pay attention to. That means this will definitely be the third slide. This is more important if you're doing what I'm doing here and you have multiple rows of slides. You don't want to duplicate the first artboard down the way first and then go across, otherwise this may result in your slides being out of order. You can always rearrange these though afterwards, so it's not the end of the world if you do that. I'm just going to continue going through these slide numbers and I'll adjust these all to match each slide. Okay, so that's all of our slide numbers in place now. So the next thing I would normally do is start to think about the content and where it's going to go. So that's where we have our two content layers. I'm going to make sure that our header footer layer is now locked, and that way I'm not going to accidentally move or edit any of these elements that I don't want to. So from this point I'm going to skip ahead to the final design for this client. If I was to show you absolutely every little step that I take, we'd be here for a very long time. So we'll skip ahead and I'll run through some of the key points in the design that I've created. So here we are with the finalized design, and obviously there's a lot more content in place now, and this looks quite different from what we started with, but the key principles are all still there. So let's start with the cover page. Like I say, you want this one to really stand out. So what I've done here is gone slightly off the template design that we have. If I enable my guides, I've added in this image on the left hand side, and all I've done here is create another 100 by 100 pixel square to the right of this image to create the same consistent margin between the image and our text content here. And I've just added another guide to help with that, so this is something that you can easily do as well. I've actually added a full logo on the cover slide. This can be a good idea as well, just to make it stand out a little bit more from the other slides. I don't think you need to have a full logo lockup on every slide. That can be a bit overkill and a bit distracting from the actual slide content itself. But everything else is largely the same. We've actually got the brand colors and text in here as well. I've used, instead of an arrow, just another small graphic element to link the slides together. In this case as well, instead of having our text aligned to the margins, it's still left aligned, and that's one thing I would recommend, is to use left aligned text where you have larger bodies of text, as it's much easier for your audience to read because it's all on a consistent plane. But what I've done is just group these elements together, and then I'm just centering it within this slide so that it's the clear focal point, it's easy to read, and it's not getting too close to any of the other elements. Next up, we have some image slides. So these are very simple, and this is where our content images layer comes into play. So we have some text here that's sitting on our content text layer. Any text is most likely going to be sitting above any images we have. So that's why I keep them ordered like this. You'll also notice that I've removed all of our header and footer elements from these image slides because they're not going to show up, and it's not the point of these slides. We don't need to have those elements on every slide. So in this case, they've just been removed. And what I've done here is just simply dragged in an image and used a clipping mask to make sure it's being contained within this slide. If I jump back over to our template file, let's scroll over, we have these image placeholders. If I unlock the content images layer, these are basically to place images within. If I go over to this white slide, for example, we actually have a rectangle on this layer. This isn't actually the background color, but what it means is that we can place an image into this. So if I go back over to my Nicole Smith template, what I'll do is just show you exactly what I did to set this up. I'll double click into this. I'm just going to cut this image away and I'll double click back out. So you can see my background layer is actually locked, but I have a rectangle set up at the size of this slide. If I paste my image back in place, if you're placing an image into an Illustrator document, it can place in at its actual size, which can sometimes be way bigger or smaller than the slide, so you normally have to resize it. So with an image placed in on that content images layer, what I always make sure I do when I place it in is size it correctly, right click on it, go to arrange, and then send to back, and that means it's going to be sitting underneath this rectangle that we have set up here. From that point, all I need to do is click and drag over both of these elements, right click again, and then click make clipping mask, and that's just going to crop the image to the size of that rectangle, and it's nice and neat. As I say, anything outside of these artboards isn't going to get exported anyway, but you still want to make sure that your image isn't leaking into other slides, for example, unless you want it to. So this is just a slightly neater way of doing this. So this is the same for the next slide as well, and we have a few of these before and after slides set up, all of them completely consistent in appearance, so they all have these before and after titles applied to them as well. We have another text slide here with the exact same principles being applied. Another thing to note is that we use paragraph and character styles, and we have them set up in our template file. So what they are, if I go over to our template, is formatting for each type of text element that we have. So this can really help with consistency in a design like this. So I have these set up over on the right hand side. You can equally go to window, down to type, and then you have your character styles and paragraph styles within there as well. So as you can see, we have styles set up for the cover slide heading, subheading, inner slide headings, body copy, as well as the header and footer text elements as well. So if I'm to unlock my content type layer, for example, example, I'll select this body copy here. You can see it has the body copy paragraph style applied to it. And this is the same with all of the body copy throughout this document. So if I was to make any changes to this body copy paragraph style, if I double click on it, for example, I can go to basic character formats and I could adjust the size from here. That's going to change the size of all of the body copy throughout this design. So this is a nice, easy way of making sure that your text is consistent throughout. You've got a clear hierarchy between things like headings, subheadings, and body copy. And it's just generally going to help with how usable your design is. So that's the same with our client design here. You can see the text slides that we have already are very consistent in the text sizing and placement. This one is centered within the slide as well, and this really helps with the consistency of the whole design. One thing you'll note here is that we have our graphic element sitting across the left hand side of this slide here. Again, this is sitting so that the center of the graphic is aligned with the left edge of this slide, and that means when we go to export this, it's going to still look like it's linking with the slide that we have way over on the right hand side here. So lastly, we have some more text slides here as well. I'm also finishing with a gradient slide here as well, just to add a little bit more interest to this. So we start with a gradient on the first slide and we end with a gradient on the last slide. I think this is a nice subtle thing to introduce so that we're not just dealing with flat color the whole time. And we have another call to action here for liking and commenting with the same icons as well to reinforce this. So you'll hopefully be able to see how we started and how we got to this end result. What I'm going to do now is show you how to export this. So this is, I would say, the beauty of LinkedIn carousels. We don't have to export these as individual images. We can simply export this as a single PDF, upload it to LinkedIn, and it's automatically going to turn into a carousel. So to do that, I'm going to make sure this is saved first and foremost. Let's go up to File, Save As, choose where you want to save this, and instead of an Illustrator file format, I'm going to drop this down and select Adobe PDF. So when we select PDF, Use Artboards is going to be checked by default, so that means it's just going to export each artboard as its own page and nothing outside of those artboards, which is very useful as well. If you had a smaller set of slides but you had lots of artboards, you can select range and specify which artboards you actually want to export. So I could say 1 to 4, for example, if I just wanted to export the first 4 artboards, or I could even be more precise and put a comma after that and then say 6 to 8 as well. So that would export artboards 1 to 4 and then 6 to 8 and leave everything else. So we can be quite precise with this as well, and this is useful if you're using a template and instead of having to rearrange all the artboards, you can just tell Illustrator to export specific artboards depending on which ones you've updated, for example. In this case, I'm just going to select all though and then click Save. We're then going to get a pop-up. I just like to leave this as Illustrator default, but in this case, we're only going to be putting this on LinkedIn, so I'm going to check the Optimize for Fast Web View option, then click Save PDF. And here we have our final PDF ready to go and upload on to LinkedIn. So I can just quickly scroll this and you can get a better idea of how each slide will look on its own. I think this has turned out nicely. All of the elements are flowing well with one another. It looks very consistent. This is hopefully going to perform well for this client. Now, one last thing I like to do, because a lot of the time, especially if we're dealing with images in our designs, we can end up with pretty large file sizes. So what I like to do is go up to File, Save as Other, and then Optimized PDF. So what this is going to do is just compress any images, especially if you've imported print-ready 300 dpi images. We don't need that kind of resolution for web. So this is just going to compress anything that's too large for the intended output. So I'll go ahead and click OK, and we can just replace the file that we already have there. This is hopefully going to make the file size much smaller and easier to upload. So now we're ready to jump over to LinkedIn and post this. So here we are in LinkedIn now, and what we want to do is create a new post, and the icon we're looking for is this little document. So as I was saying earlier, this is technically posting a document as opposed to a carousel. That's what it's called in LinkedIn, but it's going to create a carousel style post. So I'm going to click that and we'll choose our file. And I'm just going to add a title for this. And you can see from here that this is now in a carousel format. So we have the arrow to scroll through this and we're ready to post this. So I'll just go ahead and click done and then post. So here we have it in our LinkedIn newsfeed. If I click on the full screen mode, you can see this is fitting the screen perfectly as well. So this is great for any kind of desktop output. But that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you found this helpful and you can use our template or create your own templates with the help of this video. Remember to like and subscribe for more weekly content, and I'll see you in the next one. If you want to learn more about graphic design, we've put together a free 1-hour training where you'll discover the top 5 secrets of successful designers, which saves you the hassle of trying to figure it all out for yourself. We'll be showing you how to immerse yourself in the sector you're designing for, creative thinking and how to spark creativity, what good composition is and how you can achieve it in your designs, how to pick the right colours for your designs, and how to pick the right typefaces for your projects. So if you're serious about leveling up as a graphic designer, then make sure to sign up for the next free webinar. Space is limited and these events always fill up fast because they're significantly better than the information others charge you for, and ours is free. The link's in the description, you're not going to want to miss it. I'll see you there.